Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us with Ventura Collective and James Felton Keith for the Diversity and Inclusion ISO 30415-2021 Framework Conversation. Hello, hello. We are here with Linda, the co-founder of Ventura Collective, with James. Okay, let me just make sure that, yes, all our mics are now unmute. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, James, for being here. Linda and everyone that is participating and joining us. So a little introduction and a little quick intro for, I'll start with myself, then I'll pass it to you, James and Linda. So my name is Ana Maria de Meson Cornejo. I'm the co-founder of Ventura Collective alongside Linda. I was born in what we now call Peru, and now I'm a settler here in Georgiague, the land of the Ganyan-Gahaga Nation, also known as Montreal, Canada. I am a mother of three. I am loving co-founder, co-partner with Linda with Ventura Collective, and really, really happy to be here with James. Linda.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For those who are new, I apologize today. I'm a little bit under the weather, so my voice might be going in and out. So I'll just make a quick introduction for myself. I'm Linda Espinosa Valencia, co-founder of Ventura Collective, an equity, diversity, and inclusion consulting company who actually uses the International Standard Organization framework to help organizations embed equity, diversity, and inclusion in their organizations. Born in Mexico, now settler in the Great Toronto area, land of the Mississaugas of the Credit and the Haudenosaunee peoples. And thank you so much, James, for joining us today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure. I'm trying to remember the format that you all are using. So yeah, everybody, I'm
format.
Just James. I think it's fine, or James and Felton and Keith. I have a lot of first names, and folks can address me by any of those. I'm here in Manhattan, in Harlem, in New York. What are we talking about? Where we were born? I was born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. Anyway, I'm here. I'm here in New York now. I'm here in New York now. Yeah, but it's great to be with you too. Yeah.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself. More, James, you are the CEO of Inclusion Score. What is Inclusion Score?
Oh wow, Inclusion Score is a portfolio of companies. We've got Inclusion Corp, Inclusion Score, the self-named software company, and Inclusion Brokerage Services. We're a managed general underwriter and a managed general agent. So we underwrite and sell insurance as well. In a nutshell, Inclusion Score is a coming together of certifying body in the international or DISM per the international ISO 30415 standard. I know that that's a mouthful to everyone, but essentially we're people trying to standardize corporate diversity and inclusion. And of course, when I say diversity and inclusion, I mean equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, justice, the whole spectrum. But I think from a more formal standpoint, we're talking about people management. And, I like to say D and I just to save me time. So we are the people, if you will, trying to industrialize diversity and inclusion and how it is engaged, and make sure that the industrialization of diversity and inclusion reflects other business processes that we've as a species have implemented, I would say, over the course of the past 70 years. And one of the biggest drivers for that standardization is the risk management industry or the insurance industry. And so we're also a participant in the insurance industry as a broker, as a collaborator with large carriers to underwrite insurance, because when people have D&I discrepancies in the workplace, whether that workplace is a government, a large NGO, or a big for-profit company that we're familiar with, or a tiny company. When they have discrepancies, um, and they result in some sort of financial exchange, right? Whether it's a settlement or whether it's litigation, that is almost always paid for by insurers, right? And so in the current era, right, in 2023 and 2024 and beyond, we're starting to see insurance carriers more and more concerned with the lack of capability that corporations of any sort across really any country, even when we think of some of the developing world and multinational companies, right? Big insurance is concerned with their inability to engage their employees well and foster at least what I think the end result is, which is a sense of belonging. And usually, if companies can get all the way down the alphabet soup, the journey of alphabet soups around diversity, equity, and inclusion, if they can get to belonging, it's usually the best disincentive, at least per what the insurance industry sees, for financial risk, right? And so we're sort of all encompassing. We deliver certification, but we automate when possible the delivery of the processes that certification will garner. And last but not least, we leverage knowledge of a company's ability to implement a process, even if it's an automated process, to reduce risk, or at least communicate to a carrier that their risk is reduced. Excuse me. So I know that was a mouthful. So we do those three things, uh, primarily, often under the guise of Inclusion Corporation. But yes, the name of the company, the formal name is Inclusion Score Inc. or Inclusion Score for short. On the internet is Inclusion Score. So yeah, that's what we do. We've put a number on a lack of inclusivity, and we are. I won't say all of us are, but I'm a bully on behalf of the disenfranchised, and so I'm rarely selling companies that they need to do D&I, and I'm insisting you got to do it my way, or I'm gonna come and steal your suit. That's what I do for a living.
I think this is a perfect segue, Ana Maria. Do you want to follow up with exactly what is this new standard?
Oh, sure, right.
Absolutely. I'm gonna thank you so much, James, for that, for sharing what you are all doing with Inclusion Score. So just as a little, not as a little, but as a general information for all of us here, the ISO is the International Standard Organization. It was founded in 1947. It's an independent and non-governmental organization with more than 167 national bodies. The central secretariat is in Switzerland, Geneva, and the ISO develops international standards that support innovation in all industries. For Linda and I, we are coming from South America. The ISO is very well recognized in South America because we have manufacturing organizations, all sorts of companies that have to have ISO standards for export activities. So it's in tech, it's in managing information, security, all sorts of industries. And we were really, really excited about hearing the ISO developing the standard in 2021. So yes, it provides, as the slide says, solutions to global challenges. So I am going to now show a little information on the actual ISO standard. Linda, would you like to speak a little bit about it?
Yeah, for those not familiar with the International Standard Organization, they had been creating standards for every kind of process for large, small, any kind of organizations around the world. And usually their standards are the benchmark of any kind of process around the world because they're done in a committee. Usually that requires to have people from around the world. So in this case, and James, you can confirm this, it took over 10 years to develop this diversity inclusion standard, right? The 304115. And yeah, we know it's a mouthful, but that is the name of this standard, just like, ISO 9000, ISO 9001, they choose 30415 for this standard. So it was designed to be measurable and scalable for the needs of all kinds of organizations. It is a company-wide strategy. That is what call us to this framework, because it's not like this little piece of the organization. It is really a standard that takes every little piece of the organization to embed equity, diversity, and inclusion in it. And is actually relevant to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that are gender equality, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation, infrastructure, and reduce inequality. And of course, it was guided by the principles of human rights at work.
Exactly.
Yeah. I like that.
Yes.
So,
This is
James,
good, by the way. Like, just the background.
Hey, we're professionals.
of course. Of course. And James, could you tell us how the development of the ISO 30415 came to be?
Oh, wow. I wish you had FNS on here for that. But sure, I mean, about 12, 13 years ago, so around 2010, it's hard to keep counting backwards because the years keep moving forward as they do. But yeah, around 2010, a group met really at the Society for Human Resources Management. And so if anyone looks up the standard, again, as you all showed in the last slide, there's a connection between the human resources group at the International Organization for Standards that really spawned this D&I standard. And again, at the ISO, they just use the language D&I, but they touch on everything. If anyone reads the standard in detail, they dig into equity and belonging, etc. But yeah, it was a small think tank at the Society for Human Resources Management in the United States. And for whatever reason, a few years on, let's say 2013 or 14, the SHRM, as it's called, the Society of Human Resources Management, got out of the standards creating business. I do not know why. I do not care why. But the effort kept moving on. So F.N.S. Henderson, who was leading that group at that time, with a few other women and his colleagues at I think they still have the Institute for Sustainable Diversity and Inclusion, took some of the early findings from those early conversations to the International Organization for Standards to see if they could make a global standard. And again, there were a lot of subject matter experts who had been around for a while chiming in, like Dr. Dawn Bennett Alexander, who I know at least you all know.
Yes.
If people aren't familiar, she wrote the first employment law book. And as more people chimed in from the legal profession and from the HR profession and from the engineering profession, the standard started to morph, and it turned into what we saw really towards the end of the 2010s, which was a series of directives across four main categories that we see in corporate life, which are sort of all encompassing, because a lot of corporations are engaging inclusion in different capacities, right? Whether they're doing something internal, whether they're doing something with their executives, or whether they're doing something external with suppliers that they might have or consumers that they're engaging even. And so the standard started to form itself around, again, 2017, 18, as four big bucket categories, which were corporate governance, things we do with executives. Human resources is obviously always going to be there. It's, I think, how we thought about inclusivity early on. Those are things that we do with our employees. But the last two, I want to sort of flip in the way I normally talk about them. I think the next was supplier diversity, which was a growing trend, and I think most supplier diversity professionals that you all might meet would say that they're new to the field. They come from somewhere else. There's not a lot of standardization around what is a mature supplier diversity program and what is not. But that started to formulate itself. And then last but not least, it's really a place that we, I think about inclusivity the least. what is probably the place we should be thinking about inclusivity the most, and that's in our product delivery. Whether our product is a service or something more tangible, whether we're making, missiles at Raytheon or automobiles at Ford Motor Company or Volkswagen, or mining for coal or gold, or making cell phones. It doesn't matter. Inclusivity and even broader topics like ESG should be considered. And ESG, for folks not familiar, is environmental, social, and governance frameworks that are starting to be implemented. So we started to see those formulate around the end of the 2010s. And by the time I was aware of the standard and got involved, it was through F&S Henderson, as we were consulting on projects specific to the architecture industry together. We thought there's a real possibility to streamline how we deliver D&I as a business process. And my subject matter expertise is really in that corporate process change management, or just change management in general. The thing I think humans hate the most are probably accountability and change, right? We don't want any accountability in any capacity. I'm not talking about at work, at home. We don't want to do the dishes until our spouse is like, you absolutely have to do the dishes or I'm leaving, right? And so we'll change and design in a way to start doing the dishes because we don't want to lose that spouse. But anyway, so we implement change management everywhere else. And so the current state at that point of the standard was a bit, in my opinion, chaotic, and it wasn't able to be deployed as a change management framework where other industries could measure and benchmark themselves, and that the risk management industry will be able to audit and benchmark those other industries. And so we start to look at other standards and how they exist, like ISO 20,000 and ISO 27,000 and so many others, and processes like Lean Six Sigma. And we took a little bit from the best practices of everyone. And around 2019, I'd say in December 2019, there was a general consensus between all the different nation stakeholders, the 167 that you all mentioned, which about 163 are actively engaged with the standard. The others are others. We'll just leave it there. Of those, the standard was pretty much done. And there was supposed to be, if my memory serves me well, a meeting in Sydney, Australia, to confirm what the standard is today. And F&S was leading that meeting. And then the pandemic happened in February of 2020, and everything stopped. And so I wouldn't say but I think a lot of folks who were anticipating the standard had to sit on it for about 2 years. But the standard wasn't published until May of 2021. But in that time, we built out the first in class certification programs and software to try to deliver to the accounting industry and the insurance industry to say, this is where we think diversity and inclusion is going, as we saw grievances rise, right, from different sorts of individuals, women, first, and then every other group under that. Women being arguably 51% of the total population. There isn't good data on that, but definitely 51 or so percent of the working population. There also isn't good data on that. There's this debate about what's changing. And so what we were anticipating is we saw a regular trend during the 2010s while the standard was being written and consulted on, of grievances across all countries, of, again, women first and then other people, saying that they were disgruntled at their workplace. And then not having experienced the pandemic, because none of us have been through a pandemic, but having experienced recessions, some of us on the economic side of the equation started to anticipate a big spike in people coming out, for lack of better words, about their experiences at work. And they did. And the numbers went through the roof, which is sort of where they are now. And they've sustained that roof throughing, for lack of a phrase, a good one there. Um, and so that was sort of the process. I know this was a bit long winded, but it took jumping from institution to institution. It was really sort of the entrepreneurial zeal of about of the hundreds of people, there were about 700 or so people adding comments to the ISO about what happened. I would say a broader 2,000 that really played an impactful role. But there were about 3 or 4 people, really led by Ephinus Henderson, that were saying we're not going to let this die. In the mid 2010s, who just insisted on scaling the stature of this standard. And I think it really matters that it's at the ISO and not SHRM or some federal government, be it Canada or the United States or Mexico or England, because now it's something that everyone can adopt. And as we've grown at Inclusion Score to engage folks, I mean, you all know this well, we've engaged folks all across the globe, from Brazil to Australia to South Africa to Sweden. I just realized we had a Ukrainian in one of the cohorts. They identify that way. And so we just weren't aware. And so, I think it's sprawling now. We're still in early days, but that's how it came about. It was a series of think tanks and coordination, excuse me, across really many organizations. And the ISO is just the most fitting organization for this to land at, because it allows us to continue to collaborate country by country. And I think what we anticipate is that there'll be many versions of the standard that are applicable to different regions and different countries and different languages as we scale. But the cool thing about DNI and the cool thing about standardization is, even though many countries that don't represent the salad bowl society, homogenous seeming countries where there are a lot of folks who at least identify in a similar way, those countries will be transformed by the multinational institutions that exist there that do business, I think, in North America, because of how these large, we used to call them OEMs when I worked in autos 20 years ago, these large original equipment manufacturers, the way they'll react to the ISO standard in the United States and Great Britain, and just the rest of North America, it will change how other countries engage us. Countries that may just look at gender right now or diversity quotas, they will quickly have to catch up, because their peers who are tied to multinational companies will be incentivized via the insurance industry to do more. Um, and I think that's what we're starting to see in the market now. It's not only insurance incentives, it's also big law and big law firms starting to become hawkish about representing employees, and that is driving more eyeballs from insurers. So
And I think thank you for all that. I think it's very important for everyone to understand how this standard came to be, because I mean, there's a lot of frameworks out there, but the number of people involved in this standard, the backing that it has from the International Standard Organization, and the reputation that this organization has around the globe, and the ability that we have to actually implement this framework to every organization, independently of where they are, the number, the size, the industry. I think that's something that is so amazing. Yes. And I wanted to point out that what is the state of equity, diversity, and inclusion right now in US and Canada, and what are the characteristics that we're seeing, and how can we actually address those things with the the new standard, with the ISO. So currently, they're reactionary. Something happens, someone sued them, and immediately calling you because they want training, right? They said, like, we need training to solve racism in this organization. Yeah, of course. It is absolutely performative. Like they have the equity statement on their websites. They put their Black Lives Matter when it's Black History Month. They put the Pride flag when it's Pride Month, and that's about it. There's only based on good intentions. They do not have KPIs, they're not measurable, they don't have a budget, or it's usually one person in the organization who is the EDI person, and they're supposed to solve all the racism in a 50,000 employee company, or it's localized only in human resources. We have seen actually, which is, it makes me want to cry, but at the same time laugh, because, then now we're hearing the rhetoric of, oh, some of these organizations are failing because equity, diversity, and inclusion, like the Silicon Valley Bank. Like, no, like the one person, the one Black person, and the one LGBTQ plus, they did not, do this. Like you did this.
Right. Right.
So how is it that the ISO can actually now address these situations, that this is not the way to do equity, diversity, and inclusion, but to embed EDI in a full organization with the ISO standard?
Totally. I think to answer your question, how I think that's our main focus. And what we see again in every other industry as we implement any sort of change management. And that's really what this is folks getting comfortable with this type of change management. And that doesn't mean everyone is exactly comfortable with change, but they know that there's a process to refer
Yes.
to deliver change. And what we see is that, and sometimes there are well-intentioned people at these companies that are even giving up on EDI, right? But every no matter where I've been, well-intentioned people, they will fail in the face of a bad process every time, no matter what it is. It could be manufacturing, it could be accounting,
Yes.
you name it. And so what we find, what all of our empirical evidence says over the past 70 years, or really the past 120 years, is that incremental change, a standard process of incremental change, is the best way to grow. I think for your first circle that you showed earlier, and people being reactionary or companies being reactionary, a big crisis will happen, like a pandemic, or Me Too scales and big court cases happen, or George Floyd gets murdered, or the refugee crises scale due to wars or people migrating, and companies try to solve everything at once, right? They have a budget, and what they're doing is they want to define the beginning and the end of the crisis. And that doesn't work for actual change, and it doesn't help us integrate the people that we're aware of and known existence into our regular corporate lives. And so when you ask the question how, I think the best answer is to implement the standard. And again, a lot of folks don't understand what the standard is. Implement the standard to deploy a portfolio of all of those other initiatives, right? Whether they're around migration or women's issues, or all the different brown people. I mean, everybody is essentially brown. If you identify as white and you have a mole somewhere, you're brown. We've just classified where you fit on the spectrum differently. The point is, as we try to deploy resources to all those people, it will be necessary to have a regular cadence of how they get pushed through our organizations, business unit by business unit, right? So one training alone, I'm doing a series of talks started next week at a dozen corporations from, anyway, a bunch of different types of corporations. My talks will not save those companies. What they should be is a launching pad to them implementing a continued service, right? And the way we do things, continual process management or continual service management. And so the framework gives us a way to deploy and even automate. I don't mean full automation where humans aren't involved, but automate where they can tell us what to do next.
Yes.
If we run into a wall, if we don't have subject matter expertise on staff, the standard gives us a framework to do that, right? And so I guess the best way for firms to do well is to leverage the ISO standard. When I meet people and companies who are hiring new diversity officers and they're not familiar with the standard, or they're not planning on deploying a service management strategy to do all those other things, and even engage the neurodivergent community and the disabled community, which are two different communities, and the LGBT community, all these different communities. If they don't have a plan to engage the people that they can identify in their organization, I just think it's more dog and pony show. And the
Yes.
biggest problem with that is we're starting to see a lot of those. We've seen uh, diversity and inclusion hires weighing off about 30% in the past.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big
Yes.
number.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Um, but it's really because companies aren't finding any value in those hires. And even while I am an advocate for more D&I programming and it being more structured, I understand these organizations and them thinking that they would get more bang for their buck out of these hires. Two things, and this is going to be crass to probably some of your viewers, but these people do not know what they're doing, number one. And number two, they cannot define success. And they can't lead their COOs or CFOs or CEOs to define success in the way that a chief information officer or chief accounting officer would in their department, right? So I think we're in very early days. D&I is just now becoming an industry. I would not have called it an industry before 2021. We're just at a point where I think we have enough people across the globe who are thinking about how do we streamline and industrialize what D&I is. And you all are clearly at the forefront of that. I would just say more advocacy, more engagement needs to be done,
Mm-hmm.
corporation by corporation, country by country, to explain to companies that there's a way to produce incremental change. And if they're just talking about D&I around what the D means, what diversity is, and what the quotas are, then they're missing the whole point. Right?
Yes.
But so
Thank you.
many people are. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
No, thank you, James, for bringing that up, because we also find that when organizations are in the lookout for the very necessary position of a diversity, equity, and inclusion director or officer without a plan, that puts a lot of pressure, unnecessary pressure, and almost a recipe for failure to put all that pressure in one person only. And we've seen why is it that already EDI efforts are not working out. There's no budget. They are only in HR or only for that one person. So we really appreciate and value, and that's why Linda and I saw this as being one of the best tools that we have currently to work towards equity, diversity, and inclusion, is that the ISO framework, first of all, yes, it's internationally recognized, but it creates a framework that is measurable, that is scalable, that literally tells an organization a plan. And like you said, no matter considering all the other efforts that you want to do towards equity, diversity, and inclusion, those can be your branches out of the tree trunk of the ISO framework, right? Always generating that same streamline, having one goal, and have everything not only documented, but streamlined, again, scalable, measurable, very well organized. So that's what we really appreciated.
And democratizing risk, democratizing the risk of EDI, not put it on one person or for the organization, but for the whole system, right? Starting with the CEO all the way, to the last person that works there. So everyone is part of the EDI efforts and not just one person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have spoken about the how is that the EDI efforts right now are placed and why are they not working. So what are the risks and costs of not having a company-wide EDI framework? And you spoke about it, James, earlier on, right? The fact that it's a business risk and it directly impacts the financial performance and the workplace, right? Also, you were mentioning how discrimination lawsuits, right, from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission data from the states have skyrocketed. So now we see, more than 400 million in fines from discrimination. So those are big numbers that you were referring to that data. Also, we found through Gallup that, and this is data from the states, the turnover costs for all companies are more than 1 trillion per year. This sounds astronomical, but that's in fact it. And it's interesting to see that even in a company of 100-person organization, right, with an average $100,000 salary, there's still more than 600,000 to 2.5 million per year of costs involved in turnover.
Yeah.
So without a proper EDI framework, we are losing talent, right? We are losing that capacity. And also, we found that in the States, racial equity is one of the most important social values that consumers want to see. So, and that is also important. And here we see, how it's broken up in particular consumer groups, but also in Canada. So nearly a third of Canadians say that they've started or stopped using a brand in the past year because of its response to protest, and that they want to see CEOs taking some sort of action to address racism and racial injustice. So all these things point out to the fact that we absolutely need to standardize this. And like you said, James, even with all the good intentions, if there is no structure, if there's no plan, if there's no scalable way of doing it, then it's bound to fail.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think we have to start delivering diversity and inclusion the same way that we do information technology.
Mm-hmm.
Where, again, when a chief information officer comes in with their team, it's not, everything is not on them. They're really pervading every other business unit and making everyone responsible for reporting back to them, for being a good custodian of their portfolio properties like hardware and software.
Mm-hmm.
We also see it in accounting, right? If a lot of companies, if they have those employees that are moving around, they're going to see clients, and they're distributing their numbers back of maybe if they're on per diem or what they spent on food, or how many hours, if they're hourly employees, how many hours they spent. Even if they've got punch cards and they're coming in and punching out, any type of employee is constantly feeding data back to that CFO in the accounting office. And so it's not a responsibility of just the CFO, it just becomes a broader corporate responsibility, right? And so as we think about D&I or EDI as a business offering, as a service offering,
Mm-hmm.
right? We're really talking about how are we distributing certain sorts of trainings. Now, every training might not be relevant to every department at the same time. Every data collection may not be relevant to every department at every time.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen companies with complex workforces that have different types of people in different places. But, after a big event happens, like George Floyd or something else, everyone's like, we want to do everything. Like, we want to hire 30% Black people, and they're in the United States and they're in the North, West. It's like, well, I don't know how many Black people even live here. They don't exist over here. It's not like you go to, Germany and you're thinking, how many Mexicans can we hire? It's like, well, they don't exist over there. So diversity is different everywhere.
There's
Right.
Mexicans everywhere.
Mexico. I knew Linda was going to chime in on Mexico. I thought I was. Right, but my point is that if they try to identify all of these hyper micro groups without first addressing who's there.
Absolutely.
Right? When I meet firms, I meet plenty of firms. Well, I don't anymore, but I used to meet firms say we don't have a diversity problem. Like, no, none of those folks work here, and I'm like, well, you've got women there, and do you have a women's employee resource group? And you all have heard me tell this story before, but I've seen companies that on multiple occasions, boards of men try to plan International Women's Day events, right? One group called it, they said they thought it would be sweet, right? As if these women were their wives. I was like, you don't need to be that sweet at work. I think when we talk about intentionality, the thing is companies should not be planning strategies for people that don't exist inside their walls, just because there are other groups that they could prioritize. And if you have a company of, let's say, 50 people, small company, and there are no women at the company, I think your first effort is to ask why, and can you start there, right? If you're not noticing the one guy in a wheelchair, for instance, and go, why haven't I started there? Versus we're going to do Black initiatives and Asian initiatives and neurodivergent initiatives, you name it. So I think companies have to start where they are, number one. They should be deploying D&I in the same fashion that they would information technology or IT. That's number two. And then when we talk about those changes in the market, the $1 trillion number that you presented for the United States and corporate turnover, 5 years ago, that number was 600 billion. So that's almost double growth. That's another $400 billion of turnover that we saw during the pandemic, and now I'm going to assume we're after, we've moved a bit beyond the pandemic. But as people come back to work, they're they're recognizing their power, not only because they saw their ability to move around during the pandemic, but also lawyers, companies that I know are going to be targeting these employees to see if they can help them extract value out of these companies to disincentivize their bad acting. So, you know, it all plays together quite well. But, you know, the only way I would say institutions can get better at protecting themselves from risk and ensuring that their employees are actually satisfied enough to help them grow in their abilities to engage diverse types of people is they have to let them know that there's a process, because everyone who's been working for more than a year or two, everyone of a certain age, is used to a process being implemented for something. So you can't just tell them we're going to do one big marketing event and get over the years of how some people have felt here at this company. So again, I think it's the only way forward. And I do think in the next calendar year, we'll see things explode a bit from a standardization standpoint, just due to marketing and due to, what we're seeing in the insurance industry and their ability to tie the standard to insurance premiums.
Yes.
That'll
And
be better marketing than even regular PR, because companies will hear about it from their broker.
yes, and something that you mentioned, James, that we really appreciate and we have had great success with our clients is the fact that the ISO framework starts with a very detailed assessment, right? And you were mentioning that, yes, not every company needs the same training, not every company needs the same thing. So this assessment that is data driven is really useful. Why? Because it gives us the maturity level of the organization. It's not an assessment of whether you're doing good or bad. We already know that organizations are not mature in EDI. So we just want to know where we are at. And the maturity factor means that the organization can always mature towards EDI. So that's what we appreciate. We have seen it with our clients that after that assessment, as Linda was saying, like it's not just let's train us. No, it's what are the areas, coming up with those 4 key areas that the assessment identifies. So we can target those during the first year, and understanding that, yes, this is a long term, but the fact that we can take the pulse of the organization, take the pulse, understanding the maturity level, that really centers ourselves. And it is a recipe for success, because again, it gives us that clear understanding.
Well, it helps them define success too. Like in the early days when we first published the standard, I think 2 things were a bit backwards about this industry. If we're calling EDI an industry or DNI an industry, I think there's a debate whether it is or not. I think we're getting there slowly but surely. But the main thing is firms would say, well, we want to hire first to make a plan. But I think you should, for a cheaper, instead of paying someone $100,000, pay a consultant 5 or 10, do a quick assessment to see where you could prioritize growth. Then you hire a person to manage that, whether it's with their consultants or without. But at least in that way, you've cut a corner and you know what you want to do. Every executive that I've met, even at this point, they cannot tell me what they would have those chief inclusion officers do. And a lot of them are making a lot of money. I interviewed for a few years ago and I realized that what they wanted, I'm thinking about one company in particular, they really just wanted me to travel around and be a politician on behalf of the company, which I am capable of. But I just realized they weren't actually looking for someone to implement things internally or externally via their supplier diversity. So that's the first piece, is understanding the workflow of change. You plan first, and that plan is that initial assessment to see where you are and are not mature. Then you make a hire to manage it, or you hire a company, like the Ventura Collective, to help you manage it.
Us.
There you go. Right. To help you manage it.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug, right? And then you move forward with what you can gradually change. So the first problem is the workflow of how they get into the work. The second problem, I think, is how people, a generation before this one, folks who have inherited the ISO standard, would talk about D&I as a race with a start and a finish. Again, just like IT, we will see the market change. We'll see devices change. People will move from boxes to the cloud. They'll implement AI. You'll always have a tech-infused business. As we run companies, whether it's a company of 20 people or 200,000 people or 400,000 people like Bosch in Germany or Volkswagen, like these huge companies, or 1 million people like Amazon, as they think about delivering inclusivity, as they're even growing to employ more people, whether they're making cars or chemicals or selling us goods online and running distribution centers, as they grow, they need to be thinking this will be a continual change process as we ingest more people into our big cities, into the countries that we do business in, and where we distribute goods. Because we will continue to identify demand as women come out as women, as brown people come out as all the different ranges of brown folk, and they want more products and services. When I ride the subway here in New York, I see colorful underwear in all body sizes as advertisements in the subway. I didn't used to see that, 40 years ago when I was a kid. And that's because the market is demanding it. And they have different people manufacturing those products, identifying the consumers for those products. And so firms need to think about D&I as a continual process, not something that has an end. Because if they do, then they will think, well, we just need to train everybody and we're done. I would say if firms want to train, what they should do is first, say you got 1,000 employees, you should train 100 to 200 of them on the standard. Throw them back in your company so that when you actually come with the change management process, they know how to receive it. They may not be the implementers. There may be 2 or 3 people really as the driving force at that 1,000-person company, but 200 of them that are trickled across different departments, they'll have an idea. And this is not new. We used to do this with ISO 9001, with Lean Six Sigma, with 5S manufacturing, with all of these processes, with cybersecurity protocols. If you want to do that, they should call Ventura Partners and say, can you train 200 of us in the ISO standard? And then we'll come back to the table to define success around what our gradual growth looks like. That's a good process. Before we hire the queen bee, it's usually a she, her, that's running D&I, or whether it should be.
It's 50% actually, only 50%.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. But it should be them, and if you live in a country with a decent, at least amount, more than decent meaning more than 2% people of color, it probably shouldn't be, a white lady. Yeah. So, and I'm going to say that, and I know I got a lot of white lady friends who are sitting here probably on your live cast listening to me. Look, it's about who is going to carry the torch to actually implement it. And the best way to implement any change process is to train 10 to 20% of your workforce and what that process is, then deploy it, right? You want to have that change point of how we think about D&I before you come in. Because when people hear it now, they just think, they're going to train me about women. They're going to train me about Black people now. It's like, we might, but not today. I'm going to first show you why we're doing it. Anyway, go ahead.
We have some good questions here that I want to bring up, because one is very interesting here when it comes to ESG. So many companies I work with are taking the ESG journey. How does this interplay with that journey?
This is that journey.
Perfect, right? Exactly. It is exactly what it is.
Yes. And investors are increasingly looking into the ESGs.
Yeah. So, I mean, so D&I, DEI, EDI, DEIP,
it's ESG.
Whatever you're calling it, is the driving force of ESG. Right? If you're making products and services, let's think about in the D&I framework for product delivery, anything about whatever those products are and how they affect the E or the G. The E, there are 2 ISO standards that matter, ISO 45000 and ISO 14000, which look at environmental impact both internally, how you do stuff in your company, and externally, how your product and supplier, supply chain, engage the world, right? In order to, you can start doing that now, but in order to do it well, you've got to consider how the most disenfranchised populations that your company touches, again, whether they're employees or consumers, how they interact with these changes. And without having their voices at the table, because you've got maturity designed into your D&I program, you probably aren't going to engage the E well. Now on to the G. The G is governance, and it's really a metric of your cybersecurity protocols, because you're not doing business today without a tech-infused business. And good governance means you have not only designed policies and processes for how you engage the different parts of your business, but you start to design it into an automated if-then statement around how you deliver everything from a penetration test to a bring your own device policy to how you govern the distribution of information across your organization. All of that is actually cyber and IT centric. And so the reason you would engage diversity and inclusion first is because the most disgruntled employees who will leave your institution the most vulnerable are disenfranchised populations that have a grievance with your organization, who don't care whether you have good governance or you can meet the protocols that you set for yourself or not. And if you can't keep your company governable and afloat, then you won't actually be able to make good on those environmental stewardship priorities that you set. So ESG probably should be structured as SGE, but whatever, ESG is the way we're going now. But I think in those three areas, there are 4 ISO standards that a firm could audit itself in. And if it's not doing it that way, then it's actually not doing it at all. Not from a measurable corporate change management standpoint. And I just had an argument about this with the ESG underwriter at Marsh, which, if you all are not familiar, is the largest insurance broker of the largest companies that we're aware of on the planet. And the way they measure ESG is in a laughable way. And as a result, they are still taking on the same amount of risk and paying for that risk for their clients that they did previously. And that's because these protocols that they've set don't actually work. They're very dog and pony show. And that's how corporate world works, though, right? We'll always take on a significant amount of losses until it reaches a fever pitch. You know, like Ana Maria brought up the $460-something million number at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission here in the United States. That number is puny compared to the people who don't even know that the EEOC exists, and they're just going straight to their lawyer. We see just above $10 billion a year in those grievances that are paid out through insurance claims. So that's 20 times. Is that 20 times? Yes, that number. Right? Because again, everyone doesn't know to go to a regulatory body to file their grievance. If you do, it's a surefire way to get paid. But most people don't. They don't know that organization exists. And I think if you combine that number from that organization with all the state bodies in the United States and all the municipal bodies, that number is a bit higher. But again, even that number, that's not the full picture, because some companies are just paying out. So,
and I want to bring out that that's not only in the U.S. We see Canada as a country that doesn't do litigation, but now, and Ana Maria, I think you have a couple of quotes there in Canada, Canada's data, where actually Canada has given a good payout to employees who have sued their employers for discrimination. Right now, we have 2 or 3 big class actions from Black Canadians for being discriminated against in the federal government and in the Human Rights Commission.
Totally.
So, I mean,
we can joke about that. So there's an exceptional case in Canada, 2022. A jury awarded a former employee $1.5 million in punitive damages, the largest punitive damages award in Canada history. And yes, Linda's right. 2021, a class action lawsuit from Black Canadians. So that's seeking long-term solutions to permanently address systemic racism. And James, you have mentioned the reason, or how is that the insurance industry is looking to the ISO, and you've explained it very well. And we just want to bring up a quote that we have here by Julia Altman. Businesses of all sizes are increasingly being asked not only about their DEI beliefs, but also to demonstrate their practices and progress as a prerequisite for winning new and renewal business from customers, yes, but most importantly, for securing insurance protection and for recruiting and retaining top talent. So we thought this was very, very important to bring, as Julia Altman is the director within Zurich.
Yeah. No, I mean, what Zurich is doing, and they've really, hats off to them, led this space. Other industry juggernauts are starting to follow suit, because you're right. When we think about the United States, we think about litigation. But when we think about Canada, when we think about the EU, but even countries like South Africa and Brazil and Argentina, what we're seeing in those countries where people litigate less, it's even a bigger burden on governments and taxpayers, because they'll try to legislate or regulate, their way out of this problem. But what they have to do is they have to create a bucket of funds to take care of the fallout. So you're paying for it one way or the other. One way we see it in a bit more transparent way, because we see who the plaintiffs are, who's defending themselves. But I think when we think about, we'll just focus on Europe and Canada for right now. We see the government still taking the brunt of the risk, and they're taking the brunt of the risk not just for their internal grievances, but for companies in their purview, right? Companies that are in the different regulatory domiciles of some of these federal and state and provincial governments. That said, we've seen grievances from all the way from like Marseille, in France, to Barcelona, to, we see racial grievances around being Black at work in Johannesburg, South Africa, when the majority of that population is Black, right? So even in a post-apartheid world, as they try to transition, there is still a real bump in their heads around who gets access to what opportunities. But when we think about governments, they still, back to the quote from Zurich, the insurance company, is these governments also have insurance. So everyone has to be insured. It's not just Coca-Cola. I know a tiny city in the middle of a Midwestern state that is being sued right now by their former chief diversity officer and 3 other women at the company. And they just used the standard, or rather started to show a judge that they're going to get better. And the governor of that state, this is a self-insured state, which means they pay their own bills, right? But even if you pay your own bills and you don't have an insurance company paying them for you, the price of risk, the price that you pay those bills for, is still tied to what the overall market says the price is. So if Zurich is paying the bill at Coca-Cola, that still affects the price that the state of Ohio is able to pay out a bill for Toledo. And no, that's not the state or the city that I was talking about earlier, to be clear. It's talking about a different state, different city. I deliberately used them as an example to throw everyone off. But the point is, these cities are functional companies. They have thousands of employees, and they're trying to figure out what to do right. And I can tell you, just doing a racial justice survey is not enough. It is very important. Folks should do it. But, we just saw World Pride in Sydney, World Pride 2023, this past February and March. They had a very specific focus on the indigenous populations there. There was a bit of an uproar from the LGBT community that goes every other year to have a World Pride. 2 years ago it was in Copenhagen. 2 years from now it'll be in Washington, D.C. And they just focused on the indigenous populations there, which, it's fine to have a priority. But per World Pride, everyone's coming here from across the globe, and they had a lot of grievances about the lack of support that other folks like Asian Pacific Islander populations have, and people in the global South minus Australia have. And it poured into conversations during their human rights conference at World Pride in Sydney about the lack of inclusivity of the local governments. And a bunch of our people that were there talking about insurance, and what they're doing is triggering and incentivizing the legal community to pounce. At the end of the day, people are looking at this as a money issue. So there's a cost, right? Value, I don't want to be
Absolutely.
overly philosophical here, but is a constant state. It cannot be created or destroyed like that of energy. But it can be trapped in the wrong place, or too much in one place at a time, right? It can change form like that of energy. And so getting a buoyancy between the value and where it actually is, percentage by percentage per who's in the population, is really important in a modern day where we have micro identified who everyone is in our economy, whether they've self identified or whether we're extracting personal data from them to know who they are. But as we do that, we can see where the value is, and we can predict how likely it is that we'll have legal woes for the diversity in the economy. So we're in for really interesting times, I think.
Yes, and we have reached an hour. Hopefully, we can continue this conversation. Maybe there should be a part two, James, where we would love to have you to continue our discussion. A lot of questions, a lot of really great comments in the chat. I'll give it over to you. I want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Yeah, we just want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we will try to reply offline to your comments. And thank you so much for joining us today. So we can spend hours and hours speaking about this. This is such an important moment for EDI, the way to move away from just being the right thing to do, which absolutely is, but is good for business and is a risk for your business if you don't have it. Yeah. So if you want to learn more about the ISO, about how to implement it, give us a call. If you want to be certified in ISO, give us a call too. We will, give you all the information. And thank you so much. Thank you, James, for your time. Like, we know you're busy.
Yes, thank you so much for being with us today. We really love our time together.
Thank you. All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.